Good morning. Thank you guys for joining me today. My name's Danni Napoli. Today we're going to talk about effective communication for supervisors, and I'm going to be discussing with you a presentation of an article, 20 Ways to Become a Better Communicator by Robert Ramsey. And obviously you're all here today because you are supervisors, and we're here to discuss this and learn some new tips in how to communicate effectively with our team. So let's get started. First of all, the role of a supervisor. Since you all are supervisors, give me a few words or ideas of when you think of what your role is as a supervisor, what comes to mind?
Leading.
Leading.
Communication.
Communication. Absolutely. Let's add to that and see if those are in here as well, which I'm sure they are. The first one is being a good communicator. Also working through others. Explaining, directing, informing, instructing, inspiring, and leading. There it is. So with that in mind, let's move on to what it all means. What are the main reasons why supervisors actually fail to communicate? There are three different reasons. First is the misunderstanding the nature of communication. The second is misinterpreting the supervisor's role in communication. And the third is undervaluing the importance of communication. So these are three things that cause us to fail a bit in that process. Let's dive into each one. The first one, misunderstanding the nature of communication. This is where we think really that communication is about the sender, who's delivering the message, when it really needs to focus on the receiver, your audience. And with that, the goal is to ensure clear communication by the audience, not to enhance your image as the sender. The second one, misinterpreting the supervisor's role in communication. There are three items there as well. Managers are usually seeing themselves as the broker of communication, deciding who gets the information and when. So you see a little control element going on there. Also withholding information to enhance their own kind of persona or authority. And communication is also not a commodity to be rationed by management. And lastly, by hoarding or manipulating the information, you cease to be credible, believable, or persuasive. So communication is key in our role. The third mishap at times in understanding communication is the importance of it. We undervalue the importance of it in our role as supervisor. So the first one there is misjudging the complexity and importance. And many supervisors don't work at it or seek to learn effective tools to communicate with their team. Many just think that communication is going to take care of itself. Well, they'll figure it out, or they'll hear from someone else. And as with anything, improvement takes practice. So with being a supervisor, communicating other tasks, everything takes practice. So let's move on to some of the effective ways to communicate. We have 20 ways that we're going to quickly hit today, tips. Okay, and the first tip is to be clear and timely. You want to keep it simple and be upfront. You also don't want to sugarcoat information to spare somebody's feelings. You know, that'll only lead to distorted perceptions. It's great to be basically honest, don't be vague. Okay, moving to tip 2, you want to plan it out and be organized. You want to make sure that you're prepared. As with anything, preparation is key. If need be, you want to rehearse and practice what you're going to say and when you're going to say it, because a lot of times talking off the cuff can send garbled messages. Tip number 3 is to evaluate the audience. You want to remember who you're speaking to. each time you communicate and make sure that that communication is appropriate to your audience. A savvy supervisor will tailor their communication to each individual or audience. So it's not always going to be the same for each time you're speaking with a person or a group. And you want to also be careful with the use of jargon. Not everybody speaks the same language, whether it's technology or in another realm. So you want to make sure you use language that they understand. And lastly is to be clear. Tip number 4 is to be honest and tell the truth. Lies only beget more lies. And this seems like a simple tip, but a lot of times people do it and then it becomes a bad habit. And it's truly a cop-out for not communicating openly and honestly. And if you really think about it, no supervisor has ever been terminated in their position for telling the truth. The next one I think is just a reinforcement. You don't want to lie. And with that, half-truths are also lies. So just reinforcing that point. Tip number 6, you always want to check for understanding and solicit feedback. And the way to do that is by asking questions. You also want to be aware of an audience's reactions. It's very important to look at their expressions and interpret that, because if they look confused, they likely are confused. And you never want to assume they understand. You want to get confirmation. So that kind of takes us back to asking questions. You want to say, hey, does everyone understand? Do you have any questions? And go from there. Tip number 7, avoid communicating when angry. You don't want to say things that you don't mean or will regret later. Even in our own personal lives, we speak, and once we say something, we cannot take those things back. Angry words only foster angry emotions, not understanding. And sometimes it's hard, but you want to learn to bite your tongue and cool off first. And I think that goes for all of us sometimes. No one's exempt from that. Tip number 8, you don't want to speak like you're reading from a textbook. You want to be natural and believable. And you want to be genuine. You really want your true self to shine through. Tip number 9, you want to use real-world illustrations to give your life to your message. A lot of people learn differently, and using examples is easier to put meaning to a message. You want to keep it down to earth so it's easier to grasp. And those mental pictures help people a lot of times with learning the information. Tip number 10. I love this one. You never want to assume everyone gets it the first time, okay? And research shows that you have to repeat a point 4 times in order for it to actually sink into an audience. And if it's important, you absolutely don't want to say something just once. If it's important, you don't want to say something just once. You see what I did there? I repeated a very important point of repeating a point. Tip number 11, you want to make sure that the message is just right for the situation. You don't want it to be too big or too small, nor too harsh or too soft. You definitely want to tailor the message and the medium to the situation at hand. Tip number 12, be consistent. You don't want to send different messages to your audiences. You want to give them all the same facts and information, but tailor the method or the means of the communication that's most comfortable to them. So with some of your employees, you may find that sending an email is received better, whereas others might be having them come to your office and have a sit down. Okay, so keep that in mind. Tip number 13, this is a fun one. Avoid sarcasm. You don't want to take cheap shots because it actually belittles you. In my opinion, that definitely shows a more passive-aggressive approach. So you want to be direct with your communication. And the quickest way to turn a deaf ear is to use sarcasm in your communication with your team. Tip number 14, I love this one. If you don't know something, you just want to say so. It's okay to admit imperfection and lack of knowledge, okay? And a lot of times people think by acknowledging that, it's a weakness. It truly is a sign of strength. And also, with your team, it will build a connection and it shows vulnerability. And this is where we come back to being genuine. And with that, reinforces honesty between you and your team, okay? We're gonna move on to tip number 15, which is basically to keep it simple. Shorter is typically better, whether you're speaking or writing. You wanna make sure that your communication is to the point. And always remember that your audience has short attention spans. Tip number 16, give reasons for your actions. You don't wanna just refer to policy or hide behind a company handbook or rules. You want to provide explanations and demonstrate through examples of why it's important. We have a few more to go. Tip number 17, which I think gets looked over, is listening. Being a good communicator always starts with being a good listener. And always remember, you don't want to overtalk. You should be spending at least half of your time listening. And it's always important to remember that communication is a two-way street. It's not just directing from sender to receiver, okay? Tip number 18, you wanna be natural. You wanna write like you talk and so forth. You wanna write with your ear. And with that, I mean, read what you're writing, hear what you're writing, as though you're reading it from the receiving end, okay? Put yourself in their shoes receiving that message, and try not to be too literary. Number 19, dare to be passionate. And this is again one of my favorite ones. Dare to be passionate about values and priorities. You want to avoid being cold and lifeless. Our job as supervisors is to lead and guide and inspire. With that comes passion. Your emotions and your passion is going to reflect and be absorbed by your team. So it's okay to have enthusiasm. That adds a lot of zest to your communication, and they'll appreciate that. And passion is persuasive. I love that point. What's more true than more passionate you are about something, the more believable and persuasive you are to those around you. And last tip is tip number 20, listen to yourself. You want to take time to really hear what you're saying. If you don't like how it sounds, change it up. Put yourself in the seat of the audience as the receiver of the communication. And always remember that it's never too late to improve or reinvent yourself as a better communicator. I know all of you, we're here today, are in that role of supervisor. Some of these things may have been very common and familiar to you, and you may feel like there's things that you do quite well. Hopefully, you'll walk away with some things that you can add to your skill set and expand and develop on. I'm here if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And then I'll be here afterwards, and we have some additional resources and information if you'd like to learn on some other subjects or more about communication. I really thank you for being here today.
Thank you.